back to the Prepping for Everything podcast with me, your host, Emily. I have been speaking to you all this week about growing food, growing our own food, expanding our gardens. It's that time of the year that everything is getting planted, everything's coming alive. Are you excited? Because I get so excited at this time of the year, especially after such a long winter where you feel like you're kind of stuck inside and everything's dark and cold and miserable, or at least it feels like that in the north of Scotland. I feel like we do not see the sun for so long, and you can tell, you can see it in people. We're all a little bit unhappy. We need to take our vitamin D supplements, and then as soon as we see a bit of sun, people are at the beach. I mean, it's only 10 degrees, but as soon as that sun's out, we are like different people up here in the Northern Hemisphere. We have been up at our new house a lot recently, sorting the place out. We are still only doing the inside of the house, but I am itching to get outside into the garden. I just can't wait. Like, I'm trying to plan where the vegetable patch is going to go, where the polytunnels are going to go. We're quite lucky because the last owners of the house actually left us one full polytunnel and then the frame for another polytunnel as well. So that's a great saving that we've made already. And we're just trying to figure all of that out at the moment. I don't think it's even going to be this year that we can crack on with that. We have got so much to do on the inside of the house. I know I keep going on about it, but it's just like a bomb has gone off in there just now. It is a complete construction site, and I think that we have to prioritise actually getting the inside of the house ready before we can even think about moving on to the outside. And there's a few things that we need to consider about where we're moving. So we're about an hour north and more inland than where we currently live just now. And right now we are close to the sea. We're at sea level, but we're moving to higher elevation. And just now we're so used to gardening with what's around us. So for example, every year we collect seaweed and we put that into our soil. And seaweed is just amazing stuff, even in the water, but somehow it's even more so when it's out of it. It's so good for us and our animals and our soil and our plants. So the reason that you would use seaweed in your soil is because it contains around 10 times the mineral levels of land-based plants, and it's really rich in iodine and calcium. So you can put them directly onto your beds. It's going to be salty, so you can't plant directly into them. But with a little bit of rain, it will wash the excess salt away, and then you can just let it break down from there. If you don't have beds that are suitable for seaweed, just adding it directly, you can put it into your compost or compost it on its own, and then once it's broken down, it's just the magic ingredient. It is so amazing. You can let it continue breaking down. You can add it as mulch and then it will just do its thing from there. And I want to tell everyone to try it. I know that it's not accessible for everyone. If you're nowhere near the shore, you're probably going to have to buy some. And I just want to also say that it's important to only collect seaweed that is washed up. It's definitely not sustainable for everyone to go out into the sea around the rocks and pulling all the seaweed off. But especially during winter storms, loads of it comes up onto the beach, and that's really, really great stuff to gather. We would go down with our wheelbarrow and just throw it all in and then, go and stick it into our soil and let it break down from there. But where we are moving to, we are nowhere near the sea. And so I'm just thinking about our garden, and I don't want to have to go back to feeling like a complete beginner again, because to be honest, I still consider myself a beginner. I am nowhere near an expert when it comes to gardening or growing food. I am always learning every single year, and I think it's probably going to be like that for the next 30 years or something. It's a hard thing to become an expert in, and then you think you've cracked it, and then you have 1 year like last year where it was really hot for us in like April and May, and it kind of gave everything a false start, and then it got cold again. And our yield last year just wasn't that good. Yeah, for example, the year before, our polytunnel was just bursting with tomatoes, and then last year everything kind of stayed green. I had to take a lot off the vine and ripen them indoors. So a lot to learn. I definitely make use of our local garden centre. The man in there is just a wealth of knowledge. I actually said to him the last time that I was there that I'm taking a notebook in because I need to write down everything that he tells me. He gives me a lot of information, especially about where we're moving. It's a little bit windier. Like I said, we're higher up. So I was asking him about fruit trees, and he was saying that with your fruit trees up there, especially when you're first planting them, obviously they're not as strong. He said to plant them in a V shape or a W shape, depending on how many you buy. And that pretty much protects them they protect one another from all angles from the wind. And I was just like, even little nuggets of information like that, I love learning more, and it does make sense. Sometimes all you need is for someone to tell you and you're like, oh, why did I not think of that? I'm going to take this year to kind of figure out the lay of the land. The more that we're there, the more that we're kind of seeing the way that the sun shines into the garden. I don't want to go and dive straight into it this year and completely mess up because I put a vegetable patch where a vegetable patch has no use being. You want to really make the most of your surroundings, the way the sun rises and sets, kind of what's around you, what is protecting the garden, your vegetable patch, how much direct sunlight are you getting. All of these factors come into play. And also, I'm thinking about where we're going to put our animals, because we haven't figured everything out yet, and I don't want to go and put all this time and effort into getting the perfect garden just for the likes of these goats to have access to it. And I know that we can fence them off, but I'm taking this year. This year is planning. As much as I am excited to dive in and get ahead of myself, we've just got to take it slow. I feel the need to reiterate that I am not an expert. I only manage to get by, scrape by every year. I sometimes just plant things and really hope that they just go and do well. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, that is when I learn or try to dig into what happened, where did I mess up, and try and kind of resolve it from there. It's not always that easy. I know that we are blessed with time. We are blessed with having the space and capacity to mess up every year. I think about way back when people didn't have that luxury. If a crop failed, it meant that people starved. And that was the fact of the matter. The good thing though now is we are blessed with information. I feel like back then it was probably a great thing as well, because you were likely to have people before you teaching you all these skills because you needed to know them. And we can sit here and be upset and frustrated that we might not have that around us, but we do have the information there if we go digging for it. The internet is vast and filled with knowledge, and we can go looking for people too. You can find people at garden centres, gardening clubs, community gardens, allotments. You can even find people online. Like, I've got so many people on Instagram that I'm consistently learning from. And I want to say that if you are looking to learn from someone specifically for growing food, you're probably going to want to find someone within your region and within your area, because this vastly varies depending on where you are in the world. Like, there are so many great gardening accounts that I love in the States, for example, but it doesn't correlate with where I live. Their growing seasons are completely different from here. So if you're looking to learn, maybe try and find a book or a blog or a person who is in your area, because this is who you're going to best learn from. And don't discount the old people. If you have a neighbour, specifically an elderly person who has gardened their whole life, they are a wealth of knowledge. Like, I could sit and pick these kind of people's brains all day, all night. I love it. More often than not, they are so excited to pass on their information too. If you can find someone that you could go over, bring them some bread, sit and speak to them for a while, and yeah, the ones that I have met anyway have taken such pride in their gardens that they just come alive when you're talking to them about this kind of stuff, and they're delighted to pass on the information. Hi listeners, are you ready to take your preparedness to the next level? My comprehensive online course is a great place to start. From food storage and preservation to water readiness and bag out bag checklists, I've got you covered. This is more than just presentation screens. I've also added downloadable worksheets, video tutorials, checklists, and loads of prepping content, which is consistently being added to as we generate new ideas. Not to mention, you get to take it in your own time to fit around your lifestyle, and you get lifetime access to the content. And here's the best part. As a valued listener of this show, you get an exclusive 10% discount with code POD10. That's POD10 to enter into the coupon code section at checkout. Don't miss out on this opportunity to level up your preparedness game. Visit the link in the show notes to enroll today, and together we can build a future where we are prepared for whatever life throws our way. I'll see you there. I personally kind of wish I had somebody who I could speak to and was working alongside me when I first began growing food myself, because it would have saved me from making so many mistakes. And I actually think it would have made the whole thing a little bit more enjoyable, because I can remember when I first started, It felt really stressful because I didn't know if I was doing anything right. You know, you don't know, is your soil right? You don't know how far down to plant your seeds into the soil. You don't know how many seeds to put into the pot. Like, everything is just really confusing when you first start out. So if that is you, I see you, I hear you, I understand. Keep going. It does get better. You do learn. And learn we do. I can remember the first year I was growing, I think it was cucumbers. And I planted them indoors. I sowed the seeds. I was caring for them every single day. You get so excited when you see that little green shoot come up through the ground and everything feels amazing. And yeah, you nurture them because they just seem so weak, and they are. They're fragile little seeds at first. And I thought, okay, it's a little bit warmer now. I'm going to put them outside because that would be the next step, right? Well, I planted them outside and they all died. And I had no idea what went wrong. And then I didn't realise you were meant to harden. This is what they call it. You're meant to harden off your plants. So what that means is putting them outside for a while to get used to the elements, to sort of get blown around by the wind for a little bit. And then you usually take them back in, you know, overnight, or if it's really stormy. And you do that for a few weeks until they grow thicker, they get stronger stems, and they're more used to the outside elements. They can handle then being transplanted. So I learned the hard way when they all died. And right now, thinking back to that, I think that is so silly. Why would you not harden off plants? But when you don't know, you don't know. So hopefully you can learn from my mistakes here. If this is going to be your first year growing any kind of food, listen to me, hear me out. Don't grow all of your food inside and then just expect it to do well when you transplant it out, because sometimes they need a little bit more help than that. And sitting here, I'm thinking, what can I tell a beginner gardener? If I could speak to myself however many years ago, what would I want to know? And number one is probably only focusing on growing foods that you like. If you don't like coriander or cilantro, for everybody in the States, I hate coriander, but I can remember I used to try and grow it because it would come in, like, you know, if you got different herb packs, and then I would grow it and it would just go to waste because I hate it. So only grow what you like. There's no point in putting so much time and effort into things that you're never going to use. And some people might disagree on that. Yes, you can gift it to friends and whatever else, but if you have a limited amount of space, why not focus on growing things that you eat consistently? So what do you eat consistently? For us, a staple in pretty much every dinner time for us are onions. We eat a lot of onions and they are really easy to grow here. They do well. We, again, live in the north of Scotland. It's cold here. Onions do well, and they do well directly into the ground. Most years I grow them by seed, which means that I start them indoors, harden them off, and then transplant them outside. But this year I've got sets. So you've got your little onion bulbs, and I'm going to put them directly into the ground, and it just skips that step of what I initially do, because I didn't think that I was going to grow food this year. I thought with how busy we were and everything going on, I'm going to miss out a year, but I feel like I'm missing out. I love it. It just brings me so much joy, and it ties in so well with the seasons now. It's just something that's in my year-to-year life, and I can't not do it. So we're actually expanding our garden. The garden that we're in right now, not the garden that we're going to. And I had this goal of growing enough onions for the year, and I had that goal last year. Honestly, I didn't realize how much space I would need to do that. So I'm consistently learning too. We're not completely self-sufficient. It's not the goal, but I want to try and get there. And just say we eat an onion pretty much every day. It does go into most dinners. You're looking at about 365 onions, right? That's a lot of onions. And we built 2 massive raised beds last year, and we pretty much only put onions in there and some sweet peas. Yeah, we had nowhere near enough space. So this year what we're doing is sort of tilling the garden. We're taking all the soil back, and we're going to plant loads of onions. So I will check back in at the end of this year and let you know how that goes. So onions are a big one for us. The next one are potatoes. I always want to do a Keith Lemon potato. But I try not to. I know how annoying it is to listen to me. Potatoes onions. This year we're trying sweet potatoes. We have never done sweet potatoes before this year, and we're going to try them in the polytunnel. If you don't know what a polytunnel is, it's kind of like a greenhouse but different. It's a tunnel that's made from steel semicircular beams and it's covered in polyethylene. We love our polytunnel. It's really good for us here because it extends our growing season. It means that it gives us more options on what we can grow and how long we can grow. We can start planting earlier in the spring and continue later into autumn, which can obviously just produce more food for us because it gives us a longer harvest period. It's also great for protecting everything that you're growing from extreme weather. It provides shelter from harsh conditions and it just helps prevent any damage to your crops. And one of the best things I've found is disease management. I was speaking to a lot of you on Instagram and a lot of you really struggle with keeping any pests away from your crops, and I just don't have that. This is where I struggle to give information to you because I've not really come across this. Like, touch wood, it's not something that we've struggled with so far. But back to what we grow every year. We grow onions, potatoes, they are the staples. We are trying sweet potatoes started from slips, so I'm just going to order them online actually because I was struggling to find any locally. And what sweet potato slips are basically the young shoots or sprouts that develop from the sweet potato tuber itself. They are then used for propagating sweet potatoes. So to create them yourself, you can actually place a sweet potato tuber in a container of water or soil and allow it to sprout. So when it sprouts, it will produce these like long little shoots, and they are called slips from the eyes or the nodes of the tuber. I hope this makes sense. If not, just kind of Google what I'm saying. But you can then remove them from the sweet potato and plant them in the soil to grow a new sweet potato. So yeah, you can grow food from food. And we have never actually done these ourselves before. This is why I'm looking at buying some this year, just to cut out doing that. Like I said, you don't need to do it all yourself. You can buy your sweet potato slips. You don't need to go through this whole process. You can make it easier for yourself, and that's what we're going to do. I start to feel overwhelmed when I feel like I need to do it all. I need to save all the seeds. I need to be planting them again next year. And right now we are blessed. We can buy new seeds every year. I do save seeds, especially from the company that I buy seeds from. They're called Real Seeds. If you're in the UK, I really, really like them. They're open pollinated, they're heirloom seeds. They're just really good quality seeds. They're what I want to be producing food from. And yeah, it just means that you can save these for next year's growth. But you don't need to do it all. It's okay if you don't do it all. So those are the three that we're focusing on, especially the potatoes, because let's be honest, we eat them a lot here. They go into a lot of our meals. They've got a good amount of calories and carbohydrates, and they're going to fill you up. If you need it, they're going to fill you up. This is why our ancestors were so dependent on potatoes. And this is why you did not want blight or your crop being ruined, because people went really, really hungry. Another thing that we grow a lot is tomatoes. In the polytunnel, they do really, really well. I have not tried growing tomatoes indoors, but they can also be done in like a warm windowsill. If you've got a hot porch, they do really well in there. We use tomatoes again in a lot of things. And also now that I've started canning, I want to explore making more tomato ketchup, making salsas, and it's a great way of preserving it. The likes of your potatoes, onions, and sweet potatoes, they can last really well over winter, like months and months and months when they're stored correctly. The same as your carrots. If you grow the correct variety, you can just put your carrots directly into, sometimes sand is really good, and it helps prolong the freshness for months. Your onions, dry them out and braid them. Basically what we do with our onions every year is you want to get them really dry for if you're storing them. So we get it's kind of like a clothes horse, and we put chicken wire over the top, and then we hang the onions upside down. So we hang the bulbs through the chicken wire, so that holds them, and then their stems are facing downwards. So any moisture that's within that onion is going to run down the stem and exit the onion. And it's going to dry that way. You'll know when it's dry when the stems go really, really brown. So normally I give them 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and I do this in the garage. You just want to make sure that there's not too much condensation and that it's not too cold in there. and then they will store for months. They will store over winter until you're ready to grow more onions next summer. And I mean, if that's not self-sufficiency, if that's not taking good steps towards your food security and your preparedness, I don't know what is. You can then braid your onions afterwards. You've probably seen them online. I love braiding our onions. It makes me feel like we're in Little House on the Prairie and having them hanging in the pantry. Oh, dearie me. Anyway, where was I? I was talking about what we grow. We also grow peppers, we grow cucumbers, we grow a lot of herbs. We like to use everything that we use in our dinner herbs, like rosemary and thyme and basil and dill and, oh goodness, what else do we grow? I can't even think. But these are really, really easy ones to do. And you can even just buy one of those from the shop, stick a little bit in some water to grow some new roots, and then you can just keep producing your herbs. Like it really is that easy. The same with your spinach, your kale, your lettuce. What we typically do is start them like 1 week apart. So you'll have your seed trays. I usually start spinach from seed in the seed tray, and I do it 1 week, 1 week, 1 week, 1 week, so that you always have fresh spinach throughout the year for as long as possible. And then we bring it into the polytunnel, and then that extends our growing period. Whereas if we were only growing outside, we could probably only do that for a few months with where we live, because it gets so cold, we just wouldn't have that yield. So that is what I would initially tell somebody, if they're going to start growing food, if they're going to start a garden. Only grow what you're interested in and research each individual thing and growing conditions for, like, specifically for your area. There's no point in following someone who's halfway around the world and their growing conditions nowhere near correlate to yours. If you can find someone in your local area, even better, because your soil conditions are probably going to be similar to, and your temperature. And I just think having someone next door to you, it makes everything so much easier. And also, if you're growing food and your neighbours are growing food too, like, you can crop share. You could do the majority of the carrots, they can do the majority of the potatoes, and then you can swap at the end of the year so that you can divide it equally between you. And it's a great way to make local connections that way as well. You are building community, you're building and expanding your knowledge too. I just think that's such a cool way of doing things. See what is your specific growing zone is. You can look up your growing zone via Google and just kind of figure out when your start dates are for everything. You basically want to make sure that you are not planting anything outdoors before your last frost date. So the first frost date is the earliest date in the year that frost is expected to occur, while the last frost date is the latest date that the frost is expected. These dates can definitely greatly vary depending on your location and the climate, and some areas experience frost as early as September and as late as May. So for us, where we are, our last frost date, let me just have a little look, because it's really quite late in the year. We're in the north of Scotland, and our last frost date is around the 30th of April, which, yeah, that gives us quite a short growing period. And then if you go further south, like, obviously it warms up the closer you get to the equator. But even within the UK, like, that can vary by more than a month. So make sure that you know that and that you're not planting things out too early. Now, another thing that you might want to look into is companion planting. And basically what companion planting is growing things together that are mutually beneficial to one another. So when they're planted together, the combinations can aid pollination, prevent disease, keep pest numbers down, and just boost the amount of yield that you're getting. This might be overwhelming, so don't think about it too much if you're just getting started. But for example, marigolds and tomatoes getting grown together, the strong scent of the marigolds is said to deter whitefly, which is particularly useful when planted alongside tomatoes in the greenhouse. A lot of people like planting carrots and leeks beside one another because they're both strongly scented crops, so they can work really well together in a vegetable patch. It works hand in hand. Another thing that I've seen grown alongside carrots and leeks are lavender, but I think that's more because it attracts a range of pollinators like bees and butterflies, so it could increase the number of pollinators to your patch. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on this. We do not do a lot of this. I just kind of plant and hope for the best, but if you want to look into that, look into that. And lastly, what I'd like to tell beginner gardeners, beginner gardeners, is that you don't need ample amounts of land or money to do this. Like, when we think back in the day, people had to do this because they had no money. They had to grow their own food because that was the only way that they were eating. It's easy for me to sit here and say that now, but you can do it. You can take the steps to do it. You can literally use the tomatoes that you already have, that you've bought, scoop the seeds out, put them into some water. You want to leave them for maybe, 3, 4, 5 days until you see a little bit of mold on the top. And then that just helps remove the coating on the tomato seeds so it doesn't germinate. And after that amount of time, pour your seeds into a sieve, wash them through completely, which helps remove the mold. Put them on a piece of kitchen roll to dry out, and once they have dried out properly, store them in a paper envelope and keep them in a cool, dark place until spring. And then you have pretty much free seeds to grow your tomatoes. I've seen people literally just take them out as well from the tomato, put them into soil, water them, and yeah, you can grow your tomatoes from there. If you want to save the seeds, you're wanting to wash them first and dry them out completely. There are cheap ways of doing this. If you're in an apartment, you can still grow food. Obviously, you're not going to be able to grow the amount that you're growing on acreage, but you can still grow food. Utilize your windowsills. You can look into grow lights. They're really useful as well. Look into vertical gardening if you're tight on space. So it's a system of gardening that uses containers that stack on top of one another to grow plants upwards instead of horizontally and out the way along the ground. It can take many different forms. Like, there's a guy that I love on Instagram. His name is, let me have a look, the Frenchy Gardener, and he is showing you how to grow your own organic food in pots and containers. It's really cool. You should go and Instagram that just now because I learned so much from him, and he just makes it really accessible to everybody. You're not left not being able to grow food because you're not on a homestead with hundreds of acres. I promise you there is always something that you can do. And I say it in pretty much every podcast at this point, but start with herbs. They are so easy. They can be done in a windowsill, and once you've cracked that, just move on to the next thing. Don't overwhelm yourself. It's one of the biggest things I can tell you. If you decide you're going to start gardening, it's beneficial to not think, oh, I'm going to be completely self-sufficient. Let's dive into growing all of my own food for the whole year, because you're soon going to be disheartened. It's normal to make mistakes. It's normal to not know what you're doing straight away. And I just want to encourage you to start. It's better than sitting paralyzed and feeling like you need to read and research everything before you even plant one seed. You've got this. You absolutely have got this. So let's take a few questions before we wrap it up. So someone actually asked me personally recently if I prefer indoor or outdoor sowing, and I always sow my seeds indoors. I think that I get too excited, so I want to start early, so it works really well for me. But I also know that if anything fails indoors, I've always got a second go directly outside. But this year I am actually doing a lot outside as I feel like I'm getting late started, if that makes sense. Ragged Edge Farm asks, how do we deal with weeds, especially nettles and thistles? So I was just hand pulling weeds for a long time, but now we use like a black tarpaulin, like a black tarp, and then just stick holes in it and plant our plants in there, and it really helps keep the weeds at bay. I don't use any weed killer or anything like that in our garden. It's not good for the animals, and it's certainly not good for us, especially if we're spraying it onto what we're going to be eating. We've got to be really mindful of what we're putting on our vegetables and fruits or anything that we're consuming, because that's one of the big reasons that we grow our own food, right? Because we have the power over what has been sprayed on it, what's not been sprayed on it, any of these pesticides and any of these really cancer-causing chemicals. I think a lot of what's being put into the store nowadays is really detrimental to our health if it's going to last for months and months and months and years on end. If it's got a coating on it that is being made in a lab, it doesn't resonate well with me, especially this new appeal. Have you seen that? It's been coated on apples and whatnot. It's like this coating, and they've sold it in a way that's meant to be really, really good because it makes all this fruit and veg last so much longer. Yeah, no. That's all I'm going to say. Do your own research into these kind of things, but we are quite conscious of what we're consuming. And that was a main driving factor for wanting to grow our own food. It's not only food security, it's because you have the power over what you are ingesting and putting into your body. Leslie asks, what are the expenses to gardening? I'm poor and I don't think I can afford it. I do see where you're coming from. The initial cost is probably a little bit higher. I always say that gardening's pretty much free, bar your time and effort that you put into it. But I understand that there are initial layouts. You want to add together the cost of your soil, your pots, your plants, or your seeds, see how much that costs, and then the cost to protect them with things like polytunnels or greenhouses or fences or coverings. You know, you can put frost covers over them if they're still outside. That can really help them. The cost to water them. Are you getting charged water bills? Are you going to collect your own rainwater? And then the cost of any gardening tools. I think that's the initial layouts that I can think of. But for the likes of infrastructure, like your greenhouses and your fencing and your tools, I do personally see this as an investment, and it's usually a one-time cost, so I don't factor it into every year growing. After you've spent that initial outlay, the subsequent years are you just reaping the rewards of your garden after you've put that effort and money into it. It depends what your priorities are, what you have money to spend on. But again, you don't need to jump into growing a garden. You don't need to jump into buying a polytunnel or a greenhouse. And I see a lot of people make greenhouses online with just old windows and doors that they have sourced from Facebook Marketplace. And another thing is, if you go onto Facebook Marketplace, the amount of free greenhouses I have seen going is crazy. A lot of the time people do want you to take them down, so that is where the effort is. That's where the time and the outlay is. They want you to come and take it out of their garden and then again erect it in your garden. So if you know anyone who's a bit handy, if you think that you could do that yourself, then definitely utilize the likes of these places. There's always ways of doing things. John DD only asked water system ? I don't quite understand. I'm wondering if you're asking, do we have like a water irrigation system or a rainwater collection system? And basically what our plans are for our new house is we're going to have some really big polytunnels, and we're going to have an irrigation system set into that so that we don't actually need to go in there and keep the plants watered all the time. Basically your polytunnel's doing it for you. But right now we don't have that in our polytunnel. We do have a rainwater collection system. Basically the gutters are tied into a rainwater barrel, and we use that in the garden. We use that on our plants because I personally believe that our plants grow a lot better with rainwater rather than water that has been treated through your main systems. I don't know, is there any fact behind that? Will we fact check that just now? Let's have a look. I have just gone down a rabbit hole here, and there's quite a lot of conflicting information online, but I think the general consensus is that rainwater is better. There's a page here that I am on. It's gardening.etc.com, advice from the experts. Who are the experts? Who knows? This is where you need to fact check me. The most important benefit of watering your plants with rainwater is that it has a pH that's much more suitable for the vast majority of plants in your backyard. Rainwater is always best for your plants as it has a lower pH than hose water. It has more nitrates to help the plants grow and also has more oxygen to keep them happy and healthy. Mains water instead, especially in hard water areas, can actually raise the pH of the roots of your plants due to natural chemicals found in our mains water supply like additive chlorine, which can be harmful. Additionally, rainwater will typically be warmer than water from the hose, at least during the summer month, and Liam explains actually that plants do not like to be watered with overly hot or overly cold water, as this can shock their systems. They're awkward little things. They prefer being watered with tepid water at an ideal temperature between 62 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to stop reading this now. It's actually reminding me of trying to get Rosemary's bath water right. At bath time, it's a whole ordeal. I think it's the right temperature. Will dips his wrist in. He says it's not. I dip my elbow in. I think it is. And then we always need to get the thermometer out. But anyway, I am going to wrap this up. You know, when I go off topic and I start talking about Rosemary's bath time, that we have been talking for too long. I hope you all have a great week. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be so kind as to leave a review or a rating, as that really helps me and helps other people find this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all again next Wednesday.